Welcome to Wordpath, the show about Oklahoma Indian languages and the people who are teaching and preserving them. Tonight we're going to talk very specifically about the Comanche language in a kind of technical way. This will be something new for the show. But before we go to that, I have a few announcements to make about language classes coming up. First of all, Linda Alexander, who we had on the show some time back, teaches Creek in Norman, and she has a class beginning on Monday evenings from 7 to 9 p.m. in the Jim Thorpe Multicultural Center on the OU campus. There's a charge of $35 for the 12 weeks, which is quite a bargain. And there will be there's a book that you're going to have to buy too, but basically it's a $35 charge. And the contact number is 947-1853. That's 947-1853 for beginning Creek classes in Norman, Mondays 7 to 9. And they begin on Monday, September the 9th. Also, George Bunny, who we've had on the program before, is going to be teaching Creek up at OSU. This time, we taped his classes last spring, which were not official OSU classes yet, but this time they will be. They're being offered through extension, I believe. And they begin the week of August 19th, which was last week as I speak today as we're taping. It may not be too late to enroll, but if you're very interested, you may still have a chance, and I would get in touch with the OSU extension in Stillwater. And finally, Evans Ray Satepahoodle, who's also been on the show, is having Kiowa classes in Tulsa Tuesday evenings from 7 to 9 p.m., beginning either September 9th or the 16th. When I last spoke to him, he wasn't quite sure. They're going to be on the Tulsa University campus in Oliphant Hall on the first floor, and there should be notices in local papers. So if you have friends or relatives in Tulsa, tell them to watch for news about beginning Kiowa classes at TU, Tuesdays 7 to 9, beginning on the 9th or the 16th of September. A couple more things I wanted to mention briefly before we get into the meat of tonight's program. Some musings, I guess you would say. I don't know how many people have been following the political conventions lately, but I found at least one thing of relevance to to Indian language, I should say to Native American languages, and that was in the Republican National Convention a couple of weeks ago. Did you notice that when the Samoan delegation, the delegation from American Samoa, got up to cast their 4 votes, the woman who was announcing the votes began by speaking in Samoan. And as far as I know, none of what she said was a translation of the Samoan, so I have no idea what she said. Probably the usual paeans to the beauty of her homeland, like all of the states say when they get ready to vote. Anyway, Samoan is a Polynesian language, and there is a territory of American Samoa, so it's a U.S. possession, if that's the correct word. It's a territory. There's also an independent nation called Western Samoa, and between those two entities there are 175,000 speakers of Samoan. So this is a language that's, as far as I know, not at all threatened these days, but I was pretty thrilled to see it on national TV at the convention. And then on the Democratic National Convention last night, I missed Chief Byrd's speech. Chief Byrd of the Cherokee Nation spoke. And I just saw a little snippet on the news today. Perhaps someone could give me a call or drop us a line at the address at the end of the program and tell us if they know more about that. The snippet I saw on the news today showed, you couldn't hear him speaking, but it showed that there were subtitles on the video behind the podium. And I was wondering if he was speaking in Cherokee. If anyone knows, or knows how we might get a copy of his speech, if it is in Cherokee, I think it'd be fun to play that on the show at some point. Okay, so now it's time to get down to brass tacks and talk about the Comanche language. First of all, I want to say we've had a couple of shows about methodology when it comes to teaching languages, and I want to point out that this show is not about how to teach Comanche. This is part of maybe a class about the Comanche language, but if you just want to teach someone to speak Comanche, this is not the best approach to take. Tonight we're going to have kind of an analytical approach. This isn't how to speak it, it's just how to see how the language is put together, what the principles of organization of Comanche are, because they're very different than the principles of organization of the English language or any other language. It has its own system, and so this is looking at the system of how Comanche works. If you have a Comanche language class, you might expect to learn some of this. You might spend a little time doing this kind of nitpicky analysis, but more of an oral approach usually works better if your goal is to become fluent in the language. Still, the show is about Indian languages and what they're like, as well as how they're taught and learned, and I think it's interesting to see that Comanche really is quite a sophisticated language. to people who expect it to be a sophisticated language, that might even sound like a condescending comment. The only reason I'm bothering to make this comment is that there's this myth out there that Indian languages are not quite the same as, say, European languages or other languages in the world, that they're more primitive. I hate to use that word, but you hear it all the time from ignorant people. And so tonight I'm going to really show a few fascinating aspects of Comanche to satisfy everyone once and for all that in some ways it's about the same as English, in some ways it's a little different, in some ways it's far more sophisticated and interesting and difficult, at least from an English speaker's point of view. In other ways, English is a little more difficult or complicated. So Comanche will make distinctions that English does not, and vice versa. But I think it should lay to rest this notion that Comanche is somehow a lesser or more simple or more primitive or basic or less sophisticated language. It's a bunch of nonsense. All of the Indian languages of Oklahoma are every bit as complicated as English or any European or African or Asian language, and in many aspects much more sophisticated and interesting from an analytical point of view. Now, when linguists like me analyze languages, they often start at the level of the sounds of the language and then work through words and phrases and sentences. So with that kind of approach in mind, let me go to the board here. And I'll start by talking about the sounds of Comanche. Now, I've written across the top 2 lines of the board here the letters in the Comanche alphabet. This is an official alphabet, by the way. Not every tribe has an official writing system as we speak today, but this Comanche alphabet was adopted at the suggestion of the Comanche Language and Cultural Preservation Committee in 1993. And it's a good alphabet. It's much more suited than trying to spell things out just in terms of English, the way you would spell it if it were English words, because the English alphabet was invented for the English language and doesn't fit it all that well, to be honest. And it wasn't even invented with Comanche in mind at all. Comanche is a different language. It has different sounds, so it deserves to have a different alphabet. On the other hand, the alphabet that was chosen partly because it's similar to the English alphabet. After all, if we made up 20 brand new symbols, you wouldn't be able to type it or word process it on computers. It would cause a whole lot of extra problems in terms of logistics and practicalities. So this alphabet is made up of 18 symbols, and they don't include all the symbols of the English alphabet. You don't need that many for Comanche. But they include a couple of special ones that you don't see in the English alphabet, these 2. But the good thing about it is it's very consistent. It uses the English-style characters wherever possible, so you don't have to type special characters or write in diacritical marks by hand or something. And yet it doesn't use any unnecessary letters, and it's very consistent. Every time you see this letter A, which is pronounced ah in the Comanche alphabet, it's always going to be pronounced ah, never a or a. It's always pronounced ah. Whenever you see that letter, you know how to pronounce. You know that you should pronounce it ah. So it makes learning to read and write Comanche very easy. Once you learn the value of each letter, it stays the same in every word you ever see it spelled in. There are no exceptional spellings in Comanche at all. It's very, very regular. It's much better suited to the language than the English spelling system is suited to English. So let me just go through the alphabet, giving it some names that have been suggested. These are not officially adopted, but they were suggested by someone who wrote an alphabet song for Comanche. Suggested names for the letters, and they in many cases pronounce the sound that the letter makes. Okay, and I'll just put it to the tune of the English alphabet song because that's the way the song was invented. It says, a, e, ha, I, ka, mu, na, o, pa, ere, sa, te, u, te, no, which means and then, wa, ye, kese, nanakata, keheta. That says, kese sounds like nothing. That's the letter Glottal Stop, which we'll talk about in a moment. And it does kind of sound like nothing. And then the song ends out, utsa nansu yaketa nakatekwa namarekwap. And it says, nansu yaketa. That's beautiful. It's beautiful. Listen, speak Comanche language. You have to fill in, because there are fewer letters, you have to fill in with a little more text than you do in the English alphabet song. Anyway, so that's the Comanche alphabet, 18 letters. And many of the letters are pronounced just as in English. M sounds pretty much like M, N like N, S like S, T like a T, more or less. The T is a little bit quieter, and so is the P, actually. But most of the consonants that look like English letters are pronounced pretty much like the English letters. And the difficulty for an English speaker just learning this alphabet and just learning the Comanche language, trying to become familiar with the sounds of Comanche, the main difficulty is with the vowel sounds. It's often said that English has 5 vowels, A, E, I, O, U. Actually, it has a lot more than that because each of those letters has more than one pronunciation. We have lots and lots of vowels. Comanche has exactly 6 vowels, and they are pronounced A, that's the first letter of the alphabet, A, which sounds like the A in the English word father. E, which sounds like, sort of like A, like an 8, not quite, but very similar. What we write as a letter I in English, but it's pronounced E in Comanche, and it always sounds like E, like in ski. There is one English word where I is pronounced that way, that Comanche way, E. So, A, E, O, which is sort of like the O of hope. It's sort of a long O, but it's really not quite. It's more of an O. It's a little bit more open sound. Like in some English speakers make a distinction between the O of hope and another sound. It's, well, I haven't explained it quite correctly, but in English there are 2 words, cot and caught, which are very similar. And in some dialects of English, including an awful lot of speakers in Oklahoma, I think, these 2 words are homonyms. They're pronounced exactly the same. So this short O and this AU are pronounced the same, kind of like this letter. But for some speakers of English, this word, like myself, this is pronounced cot and this is pronounced caught. Ah, aw. It's that aw sound that is closest to the Comanche O. And then the letter U is pronounced oo, like the double O of boo in English. And this letter here, the U with the line through it, is called barred U when you're describing the letter in English, or it's just called when you're singing the alphabet song. And it's pronounced or sort of like when in English when you can't think of what you want to say and you go or you're thinking, Gina, how is that letter pronounced? When you say you got it, more or less. It's kind of pronounced So I'll give you some examples of words with these different sounds and spell them out so that you can see that in each case, the values of these letters will be the same. Actually, as I do that, let me talk about the 3 consonants that are most different from English. The letter B is rather different. And then there is R, which is a little different from English R. And then this one that I call Kessa, it's called Glottal Stop. Those are the 3 consonants that you really have to pay attention to, and then the vowels. Other than that, you can sort of read the letters as if they were English. Glottal stop is the technical name for this in linguistics. And that's because it's a little catch or stopping in your voice, and it's made way down in your throat, in your voice box, as some people call it, your larynx. Actually, the technical term for exactly where it's made is glottis, so it's called a glottal stop. The air stops for a moment in your glottis. Anyway, that's all very technical. The name in the Comanche Alphabet song just means wait, as in wait a minute, and it's called Kessa. But it's called Glottal Stop in English. Let's see some examples of these 3 particular sort of difficult consonants. The first is the letter B. It's not pronounced exactly like B in an English word like boy or baby because the lips don't close all the way. They're a little bit more open, like in the letter W. In fact, a lot of people who are learning Comanche as adults will tend to pronounce this like a W or a V or sometimes a B, and it's really none of those. It's kind of a cross between a B and a W. Let me give you an example. The word for white person in Comanche is pronounced Taiwo. T-A-I, that's T-A-I, Tai-wo. Not Tai-bo, but Tai-wo, like this, B-O. Taiwo. And let me give you one more. The word for really is pronounced Tavitsi, and it's spelled like this. There's that barred U, the sound, T, V, T. Tavitsi, really, as in really good or really bad or some phrase like that. So that's the letter B. In fact, it happens to be pronounced very much like a Spanish B, so if you speak Spanish, that's easy to pronounce that particular kind of B like they have in Comanche. Another letter that happens to be like a Spanish sound is the letter R. Of course, in English words like red, we say rrr. We kind of usually bend our mouth and we make this almost vowel-like sound. It's a very rrr. But it's more of a consonantal sound. In Comanche, actually, it's r. Like in Spanish, the word for but, I like you, but, is pero, P-E-R-O. It's spelled in Spanish, and it's got that r in the middle, pero. An example from Comanche, where the sound is virtually the same, is the word for uncle. It's a short, simple word, except it has this special Comanche R in it. It's spelled A-R-A, or A-R-A, and it's pronounced ara. It's the word for uncle or an uncle's nephew or niece as well. It goes both ways in Comanche. Another example would be the word for deer, the animal, the deer, which is spelled like this with the Comanche R and the barred U, araka. That's pronounced araka. That's the word for deer. And finally, let me make myself a little bit more room and we'll talk about the third unusual consonant, which is that glottal stop up there, which has gotten the nickname kesa, or wait a minute, wait, in Comanche, because it's like a little interruption or stoppage or waiting in your voice. Let me give you an example so you can see what I mean. The word for cat, this is the glottal stop, or kesa. The word for cat is wa'aw, and it's spelled like this. Wa'aw. I'll explain in a minute why there are two O's on the end, but they're pronounced the same as this O I was talking about here. It's just held on a little longer. Wa'aw. So this sound, if that sound were not there, if it were spelled just W-A, pardon me, W-A-O-O, it would be pronounced, I guess, wa'aw. Very smooth, but it's wa'aw. It's got that little interruption or stop or waiting in the middle of it. That's the glottal stop. So cat is wa'aw, and the word for hand is ma'aw. Spelled like this with the glottal stop in the middle of it. Ma'aw. So that's the three difficult consonant sounds and the vowel sounds, which again, if you've studied Spanish or Italian or a few other European languages, this is sort of what some people call the continental values of vowels because of the way they're pronounced in those languages. If you've studied any of those, that'll be pretty easy. Otherwise, you could use words like these as a reference point. And then the additional vowel, the sixth vowel, has no reference in any European language that I know, probably some language, but I don't know what it is. So that's a special Comanche vowel. Now, let me say another word or two about sounds in Comanche, and then we'll go on to some more grammar-like discussion. Besides having the 6 vowels of Comanche, each of them has 2 extra variants, which we're not used to from English. One is that you can have long and short vowels, which I mentioned a moment ago when I talked about the word wa'aw. So the topic here is long vowels. Now, don't interpret long vowels in the way that it's used in English grammar classes. It's not like short O is ah, long O is O. This is a vowel that is literally just longer. You just hold on to it a little bit longer. So a short A is pronounced ah, a long A is pronounced ah. A short E sound is E, a long one is E. Let me give you a couple of examples. I mentioned wa'aw a minute ago, which has a long O in it, the word for cat. So there's your long O. If it were a short O, if it were spelled with just the one O, it would be wa'aw, but it's wa'aw. You hold it a little bit longer. Another common word with a long vowel is the word for no, ke. This is cat, and this is no. Let me just pronounce a few other examples for you. I won't take the time to write all of them. The word for sit or sit down. If you want to tell someone to sit down, you say kare. The first vowel of that word is much longer than the second one, and it's written, let me write this one example because that's a good contrast. Kare is sit. The A is long and the barred U is short. Some other examples, the word for coyote, kutsena. That middle E is doubled. Let's see, haketa means what's his name, and it has a long E in the middle as well, haketa. It's not haketa, it's haketa. And let's see, the word for bird is hoot-su. It has 2 long U's in it. You draw them both out. This is spelled with 4 U's, this word, hoot-su, bird. And there are examples for every vowel. Now, the other interesting variant of Comanche vowels is that sometimes they are whispered. And this is really it's a little tricky in the beginning to get the hang of how to say these whispered vowels. The commonest error in the beginning is that you don't hear them at all because they're not very loud. And they occur most frequently on the end of the word where a person's voice tends to trail off anyway. Let me give you some examples on the end of words of whispered vowels. When a vowel is whispered, we underline it to indicate that it's whispered. So we can have a whispered ah, eh, e, o, o, They can all be whispered. But you say that in the middle of a normal word, only that vowel part is whispered. An example would be kawas. which means coyote or sly one, something like that. And it's spelled like this, ka, long O here, wo, and then sa. The last syllable is whispered, that last vowel. We're going to underline it to show that you don't say ka-wa-sa, you say ka-wa-sa. Sa is all that's on the end, and it's very easy to miss that and think that that word ends in an S, but it doesn't. It ends in a sa syllable. So that's the word for coyote. The word for good is tsat. Whoops, not God, good. And it ends in a whispered barred U. So it's spelled like this. Sat, long A, t. Second syllable is t. So we underline the barred U because you whisper it. You don't usually say tsat, you say tsat. Tsat. That's the word for good. Now, but it gets more interesting because sometimes you have whispered vowels in the middle of a word, and in a long word with maybe a B or a glottal stop or something in it, it gets a little tricky for beginners. Here's an example of a sort of difficult word. This means blue, the color blue. And let me spell it for you first. If anybody wants to try pronouncing it at home, be my guest. It's pronounced evivta. Evivta. This e-vi, that syllable is vi, and that syllable is ta. Evivta. So it's actually a 4-syllable word, although it will sound like 3 syllables to a beginner. All right, now, time is passing as usual. I had a little more to say about sounds, but let me look at nouns a little bit in Comanche and get some more grammar-like stuff in here just to give you a taste of it. I think I'll even take all of this off. And I'm going to talk about nouns and the category of number. In English, by category of number, I mean what in English consists of 2 categories. We have a singular category of number and a plural. So a noun can be singular like cat, or plural like cats, singular like house, or plural like houses. You have something similar in Comanche, but a little bit more complicated. Because in Comanche, you have 3 categories of number instead of just 2. In Comanche, you have what's called singular, which is pretty obvious. You're talking about one thing. We'll talk about nouns first with number categories. And then you have something called dual, which refers to exactly 2 of whatever it is. And then you have plural, which is 3 or more, anywhere from 3 on up. And let me give you an example. The word for man is tenap. And suppose you wanted to talk about those men over there, and there happened to be exactly 2 of them. You wouldn't, in English, actually it's irregular in English, we go from man to men, depending on whether it's one or more than one. In Comanche, you can have tenapa if it's 1, tenavak, whispered vowel on the end, and all of this is a suffix meaning dual. That means 2 men. It doesn't have the number 2 in it. You could say wahat, and you could say wahat, tenavak, but that would be kind of redundant. You just say tenavak, and that means a couple of guys. Or in the plural, which means 3 or more, men from anywhere from 3 on up, it would be te, na, ne, with a long barred U on the end, and that suffix is the one that's usually used for plural. So this little suffix means dual, this one means plural. And you may notice that there was a little p on the end of the singular that got dropped here too. That happens in some cases it doesn't. Let me give you a case where there is no ending on the singular, the word for horse. In the singular, you say puku. And that means horse. If there were 2 of them, talk about those horses, but there are exactly 2, then you would say pukuwaku. And there's that dual suffix again that tells you we're talking about exactly 2. You may notice there was a little change in the vowel. It was long there and it's short here. We won't have time to get into that, but that's another part of the system that you have to learn to speak Comanche appropriately. You do have a shorter vowel in this form. And then in the plural, you take buku and add na. The vowel becomes shorter for reasons I'm not telling you. And you get buku na. And there's your plural ending, and that means horses in the sense of 3 or more horses. And so in Comanche, we have singular, dual, and plural. This also shows up sometimes on verb forms. Oh, we only have a few minutes left. This may have to be our last point for tonight. We may have a part 2 of this show, as we have several in the past. The singular, dual, and plural distinction will show up in verb forms, but the suffixes are a little bit different. And let me just give you two examples of that. In verbs, suppose you wanted to tell some one person, come here. That would be a singular command, and you would say, kimma. I'll put an exclamation point to show that the sense is that you're telling somebody to do something. You're giving a command. In the dual, in other words, say you had two kids and you wanted them both to come, you would say, kimabak. Now that looks similar to the noun ending for dual, kimabak. It is actually the same on this word, kimabak. There's your dual ending. But if you wanted to tell a bunch of people, y'all come here, then that would be plural, and you would say kimaka. There's the plural ending on verbal commands, which is different from the noun ending. And you notice there's a change in the length of the vowel here, too, which is part of the system of the language. Let me give you one more example in verbs. Suppose you wanted to tell someone the opposite, go away or go. If it was one person, you would say, mia. It's just an M there. Mia. If it was two people, you would say, miawak. And you've got your dual ending on the end. And if you wanted to tell a bunch of people, get out of here, go, you would say miaaka. And the vowel gets a little longer there. And you have this same ending that you had over here for the plural command ending that goes on verbs. There are so many other things I could tell you about Comanche. How much time do we have left? Only 1 minute, so I guess I probably better quit right there. Let me tell you just briefly, one more point, and I won't even write this up. I'll just sort of explain about one more thing. You know, in English, we have what are called demonstrative pronouns. Words like this and that. These and those are, that's the plural of this and that, respectively. So we have one word for things that are closer to us and another one for things that are farther away. In Comanche, there are actually 4 demonstrative pronouns. There's ita, which means this thing, such as this card in my hand. It's right here. Or you can say ora, which would be that thing over there, maybe the camera, which is just a few feet away. Or you can say u, which might refer to something really far away. Maybe I can't even see it out in the hall. That chair out there, I might refer to it as u, that thing. And then there's ma, which is used in a variety of ways, usually for something close to you, but it's also used in what are called impersonal constructions, like it's cold, it's raining, it's hard to do that. That's the kind of sentence where you would come up with ma. It's a sort of nondescript, non-specific location. So you have ita, ora, u, and ma. You have 4 different demonstrative pronouns in Comanche, whereas you have only 2 in English. And of course, each one has a dual and a plural form as well as the singular, and so forth and so on. And the pronominal system is even more interesting when you talk about first person. But I think we're going to have to finish this on another show because I'm getting all kinds of signals here. I just wanted to give you a taste of how very sophisticated and interesting and complicated the Comanche language is. And similar things could be said about the unique system of every Indian language of Oklahoma. And they certainly deserve the respect of any human language, which is always extremely complicated, diverse, intricate, and beautiful. I'll see you next time on Wordpath.
Wa pene madaone keta. Na hene yo hene, ana ma.